Morning, children. How are you all today? Fine? Okay. Tell me, just ask questions. Any question you do have from the last topic, what we discussed yesterday. Any question you do have, must ask. What we have discussed so far in this chapter, the end of bipolarity, you simply say it that we begin with the toppling of the Berlin Wall in 1989, and then what it led the historic chain of events for the collapse of the Second World and the end of the Cold War. The Germany that had been divided after the Second World War, their unification took place, and one after another, the 8 East European countries that were the part of the Soviet bloc replaced their governments. Yes, children, they do have the communist governments, and this was the response. This has been done in response to mass demonstrations there. Fine. Then, what exactly was the Soviet system? We discussed in detail, and Gorbachev and the disintegration means the way Mikhail Gorbachev, along with him, Boris Yeltsin played the important role in disintegration. We discussed that. Fine. So questions you do have, if right now you don't have, at any moment you get any questions come to your mind, must ask, children. Okay, as we believe that this traffic must be two-way traffic. Fine. So at any moment you come up with a question, any questions come to your mind, must ask. Today we are going to discuss, why did the Soviet Union disintegrate? Why did this system become very weak? And why did the economy stagnate? Why did their economy come to stand still? What have been the reasons behind that, children? Fine. Remember that Soviet Union was the second most powerful country in the world by that time. And their sudden disintegration reveals, or we find ourselves surrounded by the questions, and here questions worth asking is not only to understand the Soviet Union, their process, and how did communism get ended there, but also because it is not the first and certainly may not be the last political system to collapse. Thereafter also, and before their collapse, we saw the collapse of several regimes, before the collapse of Soviet Union and afterwards. But here our concern is, and we want to understand the unique features of the Soviet collapse, the extraordinary aspects of the Soviet collapse, and the inferences that can be drawn, the lessons that must be learned. Yes, children, that the mistakes that had been committed, or where did Soviet Union fail in keeping its every unit intact together. Fine. Remember that internal weakness. Now come to the flashback, children. Come to Indian history as a separate subject you to have. Be that Mughals, be that the Mauryas, be that the Guptas, any other dynasty, be that the slave dynasty, be that the Sayyid dynasty, be that the Khalji dynasty, Lodi, okay, all dynasties ultimately came to an end because of its internal weakness. And here, undoubtedly, the internal weakness of Soviet political and economic institutions, we can't forget. Okay, it failed. Their internal weakness and these institutions, political and economic institutions of the Soviet Union, failed to meet the aspirations to the people, the wishes, what ambitions they had, what dream they had. Certainly the government failed in fulfilling their aspirations. Economic stagnation, it continued for many years. As a result, it led to the shortage of consumer goods. And here, large section of the Soviet society, they started doubting, they began to doubt the credentials, and they started questioning now of started questioning to the government regarding the system, and they didn't hesitate in opining themselves. Fine. Now, why did the system become so weak? Why did the economy stagnate, in fact? When we try to find its answer, children, the Soviet economy used much of its resources and started completely shifting towards nuclear and military arsenal. In maintaining a nuclear and military arsenal, arms and ammunition, this union started concentrating on development of its satellite states in Eastern Europe and within the Soviet system, in particular the five Central Asian republics. Okay, satellite states are those states that may not be under direct control of yours or one's, but they are always there ready to help you. Okay, they are just like your alliance, they are just like your partner. So maintaining good relation, development of all these certainly led or put a huge economic burden, and the system, the Soviet system, was not able to, or was not ready, or could not cope with ordinary citizens, ordinary people. Now they became more knowledgeable about the economic advancement, about the economic advance of the Western world, and before their eyes differences were there, disparities were there between their system and systems of the Western world. Fine. And now they were not ready to accept it. Okay. So several years they kept hearing, they were being told that Soviet system was better than the Western capitalism and liberal democracy. But the reality was just reverse. The real condition was something else. Reality of its backwardness. It was just like a political shock. It was like a psychological shock. And it was such a shock, they were not able to come out. Okay. Along with this economic stagnation, children, stagnation were there in administrative field, in political field also. Remember, the Communist Party had been ruling there for the last 70 plus years. Okay, and the party that had been ruling for the last 70 plus years opined that we are not accountable to the people. Can you believe, can you imagine in today's scenario? Ordinary people, they were alienated, they felt cheated. For the region, like the administration was very slow, it was very stifling administration they faced. In fact, corruption was at its highest level. It was simply the case of rampant corruption. Okay, and system was not able to recognize its mistakes and to rectify it. But we say the inability of the system to correct its own mistake. Okay, and its unwillingness, the unwillingness to allow more openness in the government. Complete centralization of the authority and centralization of authority in a vast land like Soviet Union. Okay, and the worst was that the party bureaucrats, they were privileged as compared to the ordinary citizens. they gained more privileges, and people somewhere lacked. People couldn't succeed, okay, in identifying themselves with the system, with the rulers. As a result, the government increasingly lost the popular backing. Fine? Is there any doubt? No. Now come back. What has been promised by Mikhail Gorbachev? Gorbachev promised about the reform. Means he promised to reform the economy. He promised to catch up with the Western world in terms of technology, in terms of infrastructure. He promised to loosen the administrative system. He promised to remove the rigidity of the system, to remove the extensive bureaucratic norms prevailing there in the system. So, here you will have to wonder that why the Soviet Union collapsed in spite of such a accurate diagnosis of the problem by Mikhail Gorbachev and his sincere attempt to implement the reforms. Just like when we go to the doctor, when we visit a doctor, when we are not well, if doctor succeeds in diagnosing in a proper direction, then the patient becomes cured very soon. So here, Dr. Mikhail Gorbachev, he was in the role of a doctor and he did a very accurate diagnosis of the prevailing problem in Soviet Union and started implementing the reform. But answers you will find here very controversial, children. And we still expect that future historians will give us some better answer, some more acceptable answer. Someone amongst you children would be historian tomorrow and will give us a clean picture. But as per the existing record, as per the existing documents we do have, that most basic answer, when Mikhail Gorbachev carried out his reforms and loosened the system, he set in motion forces and expectations that few could have predicted and became virtually impossible to control. It means that he hastened, he speeded up the entire process. He speeded up and he was not able to control. Okay. Now, one section of the people, here we do have the opinions divided. One section of the people, they felt that Gorbachev should have moved much faster. And they were disappointed and impatient with his methods. They were not satisfied with the speed of Gorbachev. Okay? Because they didn't benefit the way they had hoped, or they benefited very slowly, isn't it? So this was the opinion of one section of the society. Now, another section, the second section, in particular, especially the members of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Communist Party of Russia in particular, that those who were served by the system, along with them, they took just opposite view. They felt that their power and privileges were eroding. Their privileges, their powers are getting eroded. They are losing it. And in their view, Mikhail Gorbachev was moving too quickly. His speed is much more. Okay. So on the one hand, we saw that someone is not happy with his speed, that okay, he is going very slow. One section is telling he is going very fast. So in this tug of war, Mikhail Gorbachev started losing support on all sides. Okay, and public opinion was also divided. Okay, and some of his hardcore supporters, party members, his hardcore supporters, not only party members who were still with him, they also were not able to decide. They became disillusioned because they felt that at this juncture, Gorbachev didn't adequately defend his own policies. If one is not able to defend its own policies, then it's very difficult for us to be with such person. Okay? Clear? Another development, children, along with it took place. And it surprised most observers and even many insiders also. So, observers from outside, from inside, they were surprised. It was the rise of nationalism, okay, and the desire for sovereignty within various republics, including Russia and the Baltic republics, particularly Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, along with Ukraine and Georgia. Okay, so Russia, Baltic republics, Ukraine and Georgia, their desire for sovereignty suddenly came on surface, and others proved to be the final and most immediate cause for the disintegration of the USSR. Okay, here again we do have the opinions divided, we do have the differing views. Fine. Nationalist urges and feelings were working. They were very much at work throughout the history of the Soviet Union. Nationalist urges and feelings. Whether or not the reforms had occurred, there would have been an internal struggle within the Soviet Union. It was almost inevitable. Reforms had occurred or not, internal struggle was bound to take place. Okay? So this is a what if of history. Okay, this question comes under what if of history, but surely, for sure, it is not an unreasonable view. What if view of history, it is not an unreasonable view, seeing or given the size and the diversity of the Soviet Union. Just see the size, jumbo size, okay, and its growing internal problems. Okay, one view. Another view. Others think that Gorbachev's reforms speeded up and increased nationalist dissatisfaction to the point that the government and rulers could not control it. Had it reached till the accepted level, then there would have been no problem. But it speeded up and increased dissatisfaction, nationalist dissatisfaction, to that level where government and rulers, they failed in controlling it. One irony of this situation we do also have. What we say, ironically, during the Cold War, many experts, observers, they were of the view that nationalist unrest would be strongest in the Central Asian republics, and they had the reason behind it. They had their logic correct behind it, given their ethnic and religious differences with the rest of the Soviet Union and their economic backwardness. It was ethnic and religious differences prevailing there in the Central Asian republics, and economically they were also backward. Fine, but surprisingly, this nationalist dissatisfaction was strongest not where they expected. It was strongest in the more European and prosperous part in Russia and the Baltic areas of Latvia, Lithuania, along with or as well as Ukraine and Georgia. These were the prosperous part, prosperous region, more European part. Here, nationalist dissatisfaction emerged in strongest way. The common people, the ordinary citizens, here felt alienated from the Central Asians and also from each other. And they concluded also that they were of the view that they were paying too high an economic price to keep the more backward areas within the Soviet Union. It means just like somewhere someone felt or someone feels like in India that we are paying the people of North India, the people of South India, means the people of mainland of India, they are paying the taxes and much of our resources are going to keep or to ensure the well-being of Jammu and Kashmir and northeastern part of our country. But we must not forget, children, that Jammu and Kashmir and northeastern part are the part and parcel of India. They are the integral part of our country. Okay, how can we be at ease if one part of our country is not safe or intact? Just like they are the organ of one body. So suppose our one organ is under trouble, how can we be at peace? Fine. But here, the people of the most or more prosperous part of Russia, Soviet Union, Baltic areas, Ukraine and Georgia, they were of this view that they were paying too high an economic price to keep the more backward areas within the Soviet Union. As a result, dissatisfaction also rose, it took place, and finally the disintegration has taken place. Fine, children? I hope it's clear. Okay? Any question you do have must ask tomorrow as well. Okay? Have a good day. Take care. Stay safe. Stay indoors.